Morning. Today is Monday, the second day of Teves. Today is the last day of Hanukkah. It's called Zois Hanukkah. Very, very special day. Today we have to take advantage of the day, add in prayers, add in Torah studies, and celebrating the holiday of Hanukkah. Let's begin Tanya with tzedakah. Gedela tzedakah shemekareves esageula. So today we start chapter 6 in Likutei Amarim Tanya. And we are going to talk about the soul of the other side. So the Alter Rebbe began the Tanya by explaining briefly that every Jew has two neshamas, two souls. You have a soul of the godly, of the animal side, the other side, the klipa, which soon explain what it means, and the soul of the godly soul. Nefesh Hasheni is the second soul, is the godly soul. And then he started explaining first what is the godly soul. He explained what the godly soul is. It is a part of Hashem that God put in us. He explains that the godly soul has the 10 faculties, the 3 intellectual faculties and the 7 emotional faculties, and that the intellect creates the emotions. When you contemplate and meditate about the greatness of Hashem, it creates a feeling towards Hashem and the different types of emotions towards Hashem. And then the Alter Rebbe went on to say that these 10 faculties of the soul, the soul also has 3 garments. What are the 3 garments of the soul? The machshava, dibur, u'maisa, the thought, speech, and action. Now, what is the thought, speech, and action of the godly soul? So explain the thoughts on learning the Torah, doing the mitzvahs. And in chapter 5, the Alter Rebbe went on to explain in details how the learning of the Torah really connects the person and connects the soul with Hashem. Even though this is called the garment of the soul, it lifts the soul even greater to a higher level than the soul is by itself connected with Hashem. And that is because the garments of the soul, the Torah and the mitzvahs, Hashem, this is true by both Torah and mitzvahs. When you do, the garments is greater than the soul, that the Torah and the mitzvahs elevate the person. Because this is Hashem's will, Hashem's desire to do. So you connect with Hashem himself, with God himself. But in chapter 5, the Alter Rebbe stressed also the point that the Torah has an advantage even greater, which is even higher than mitzvahs. Studying Torah in a way is even greater than doing the mitzvah and fulfilling a commandment. Why? Because the Torah is the unification that happens when you study Torah, is a two-way unification. You're being encompassed by Hashem's light, and you encompass. Just like when you encompass and you're being encompassed. It's a connection, a two-way connection. And just like when you understand the subject, any subject, when you grasp an idea, then you encompassing the idea is in you. Then you put yourself into the idea to understand it deeply. And ultimately, you get it and you grasp it. So you have a connection with the being that the idea in Torah is the idea is of God. An idea of God, the wisdom of God, the will of God is one with God himself. So that's why when you study Torah, you reach that ultimate level of unification with God. And now, in this chapter 6, the Alter Rebbe begins explaining the other side. We have, as they say, know thy enemy. We have to know, we have a godly soul that leads us to do the right thing. We have also an animal soul. The animal soul tries to bring us down, separate us from Hashem. In order to know how to deal with this animal, so we have to understand what it is. So the Alter Rebbe begins by explaining that the animal soul also has the same 10 attributes. He has the 3 intellectual attributes, the 7 emotional attributes, and The animal soul wants to be that the three garments of thought, speech, and action should be in non-godly things. Now, what does it mean? He calls this animal soul, he calls it from the klipa. Klipa means the shell. He calls it the sitra achra, defining the animal soul by the soul from the other side. So it's more than, he's defining it what it's not. It's the other side. It's not kedusha. It's not holiness. So to define what is the animal soul, he defines it what it is not. So anything that is not holiness comes from the other side. So to understand what it's not, we first have to understand what is holiness, what is kedusha. So the Rebbe is going to explain that kedusha, holiness, is something which is totally nullified to Hashem. Anything in the world that is revealed, godliness is revealed in it, that's kedusha. Anything else that godliness is not revealed, a chair, a table, a cup, a car, food, anything which is not, godliness is not revealed, is automatically on the other side. Because the animal soul is defined by the ego. It's not necessarily evil, but it's ego, self-centered. And the Alter Rebbe is going to explain in length, beginning today, in the other chapters, what that means. There is different levels in the other side, which is called the klipa, it's called the shell. Why is it called a shell? Because it's just like the shell covers the fruit, it conceals what's inside. Anything else in this world also conceals the godliness, the ultimate purpose, why it's here. So let's begin and see what the Alter Rebbe explains in the Tanya. Says the Alter Rebbe, V'hinei, chapter 6, Zelu umazeh oso elikim, the Almighty has created one thing opposite the other. So everything in the realm of holiness has its counterpart in klipa. Klipa is the shell. In our context, the animal soul, with its faculties and garments, is counterpart in klipa of the divine soul. It's the counterpart of the divine soul with its faculties and garments. So he says, just as the divine soul consists of 10 holy faculties, which correspond to the 10 supernal sephiros, as we mentioned in the earlier chapters, and is clothed in 3 holy garments, meaning the thought, speech, and action of the Torah and mitzvahs. Same thing, and the soul of the other side. Kach, הנפש, דסתר אחא מקליפס נויגה, המלובשת בדם האדם. So too the soul of Sitra Acha, the soul of the other side, derived from the Klipas Noiga. We touched on this. Klipa means the shell. What is Klipas Noiga? We'll talk about it later. The different levels of Klipa. So the soul that is derived from that Klipa called Klipas Noiga, which is clothed in man's blood, as explained in chapter 1, the animal soul is clothed in the blood and thereby animates the body. So this soul, the animal soul, that soul too, it consists of 10 crowns of impurity. The faculties of klipa called crowns in Kabbalistic terminology. So this is the 10 attributes of the klipa of the other side. They refer to him in Kabbalah as 10 crowns of impurity. Why do they deserve such a nice, beautiful name? 10 crowns. Crown sounds like something like royal, special. So just in short to explain is that a crown represents a separate entity, separate king with his kingdom, the crown. That doesn't allow any other to overstep his boundaries. This is the difference between Kedusha, holiness, and the other side. And holiness, being that the holiness is inclusive in God, so we can include one another also. They don't feel the self presence so much, the ego so much. So therefore you can be included with the other. The chesed is included of gvura. Every attribute includes the other attribute as well. But when it comes to the attributes of the impurity, each one is for themselves. That's why you call them the 10 crowns. So the crowns is not exactly a complementary term in this case. So the animal soul says a cold from 10, it's included, consists of 10 crowns of impurity. Shehein sheva midas rois. These 10 faculties are 7 evil midas, 7 emotional traits, which stem from the 4 evil elements mentioned above in chapter 1. That is the fire, the air, and the earth, and the water. Fire, water, air, and earth. So each element is the source of different types of evil emotions. So, for example, I spoke about arrogance, and anger comes from the element of fire, and so on. Pleasures, selfish pleasures comes from water, and so on. That he explained in chapter 1. So it says these are the 7 emotional evil emotions. And there is the intellect, the seichel, which gives birth to these 7 evil midas. And the seichel is subdivided into 3. Shein chochma bina das makor midas, which are the chochma bina das, which are the source of the midas. The intellectual faculties are described as the source of the evil midas. Why? Because the midas are commensurate with the quality of one's intellect. So what is he saying? If you remember, we spoke about the godly soul also. He's explained that the godly soul has 3 intellectual attributes and 7 emotional attributes. And we explained that it begins with the intellect. They have the intellectual attributes, and then the intellect it births emotions. But here, when they're talking about the animal soul, he starts from the emotions. He says, you have 7 emotions, and you have the seichel, the intellect, which gives birth to these. Why doesn't he start with the intellect like he started with the godly soul? And the answer is, when you're talking about the godly soul starts with the intellect. Because it starts by understanding the truth. It takes a lot of meditation to understand the truth, because God is concealed. And you need to work on it. You need to work to understand, to appreciate the godliness, that the godliness is the truth of this world. Once you understand the godliness, that Hashem is the truth in everything, that gives birth to emotions that fit this understandings. But when you're talking about the animalistic soul, the egoistic soul, it starts with the emotions, because it starts with what you naturally love. You don't love naturally God, you love cheesecake or donuts, Hanukkah donuts. So you have these emotions, natural emotions, that doesn't take much to create those emotions. They come natural. That's where it starts. But yes, they have the intellect that gives birth to them, meaning you use the intellect. You use the intellect to understand what kind of emotions you want to fulfill, and that's where the intellect comes in. It comes from the intellect, but it's not that you need to meditate in order to create something. Yes, starts with the emotion, and the intellect is used to serve the emotions. Sometimes you go to the zoo and see even animals have some type of intellect. You go to the dolphins, you see how the dolphins swim, and they do all kinds of tricks. Why? Because they figured out that all these tricks will lead them to get the fish. So everything is about them, about getting the fish. That's what Alter Rebbe says. The intellectual faculties are described as the source of the evil midas. Why? For the midas are commensurate with the quality of one's intellect. Because a child desires and loves, meaning he expresses his midas of chesed towards petty things of little value. Why? Because his intellect is too immature and deficient to appreciate more valuable things. This is the attribute of chesed. The same thing is with the attribute of gevura, of anger. Similarly, with regard to the midah of gevura, he is angered and vexed by trivial things. He gets upset with but small things. And likewise, with regard to boastfulness, which expresses the midah of tiferes and other midas. So it's all the intellect only tells you how the midah is. Continues, the Alter Rebbe says, now these 10 unclean categories. When a person thinks thoughts originating from them, meaning when he thinks of ways of obtaining something he desires, or speaks words originating from them, or does an act which serves or expresses them. What happens then, when you use the thoughts, the speech, and action in service of the animal soul, they become dirty garments. Then, this is the thought in his brain, the words in his mouth, and the power of action in his hands and other organs are called impure garments for these 10 unclean categories. Which clothe themselves in these garments during the act, speech, or thought. And what kind of acts are we talking about? Not necessarily evil acts. As we explained before, anything which is not kedusha, anything which is not holy. That's what Alter Rebbe says. These garments of the animal soul comprise all the deeds that are done under the sun, all mundane actions, which are all vanity and affliction of the spirit. As the Zohar Pasha B'Shalach interprets this as a ruination of the spirit of holiness. So the same thing is also the speech, and thoughts, similarly all words and all thoughts that are not directed to God and to His will and His service are all garments for the animal soul. And that's why it's called the other side. Sitra Achra. For this is the meaning of the term Sitra Achra, literally the other side, meaning not the side of holiness. Thus, whatever does not belong to the realm of holiness is Sitra Achra. So, what in fact does the realm of holiness encompass? Says the Alter Rebbe, holiness is anything and everything that is completely nullified and is transparent to godliness. The side of holiness is nothing but the indwelling and extension of God's holiness. Where does God dwell? On anything that allows God to dwell. Like the story goes with Rabbi Ruzhiner. I think it was maybe it was one of the Ger Rebbes. I don't remember. In any case, the story goes, he once came into the Beis Medrash, to the synagogue. People were sitting studying, and he walks in and says, "Where is God?" And they were all dumbfounded. What kind of question is it? And they were waiting for him to answer the question. And he said in Yiddish, and he said, "Avi miluste maran," wherever you let him in. Wherever you let God in, that's what God is. So he says, "Eina kadesh baruch hu sheire el al dava shabat letzleisbarach bein bepoel mamish k'melochem elyonim." Now God dwells only on that which is surrendered to Him. Whether the surrender is an actual one, and visible, even that surrendered being external aspect, as in the case of the supernal angels. Supernal angels are openly, completely nullified to Hashem, whose entire being is constantly and openly surrendered to God. So that is a place which is in action, surrendered. But not only that, the Alter Rebbe goes on to say, but even in a place where potentially is surrendered to God. Bein bekoyach, whether it is in potential surrendered, kechol ish Yisrael amata, as in the case of every Jew here below. Is the Alter Rebbe an amazing thing? That every Jew is Kodesh, is holy. Why? Because potentially you have that power of nullification to Hashem. Why? He says, in this physical world, every single Jew who has the capacity for surrendering himself completely before God through martyrdom for the sanctification of God's name. A Jew has it in him, potentially, that if when push comes to shove, he's ready to give up his life for Hashem. Where does it come from? Because there's the kedusha, the holiness that is nullified to Hashem deep, deep, deep inside him. So a Yid is Kodesh. That is why our sages have said that even if one individual sits and engages in Torah study, the divine presence rests upon him. And not only that, when it comes to 10 people together, 10 Jews together, even if they don't study Torah at all, just sitting together, they have the godliness there. And also, on each gathering of 10 Jews, the divine presence rests always together. 10 Jews form a congregation of Israel, which is a fit abode for the divine presence. So this is the end of today's shir. We get the understanding of what is the other side, the soul from the other side, starting to learn our enemy, know thy enemy, in order to be able to overcome our challenges, and knowing that Kedusha side, that we are Kedusha, every Yid is Kodesh, every Yid is holy, and therefore he has the ability to overcome the other side. Thank you for joining me. Hashem will continue tomorrow.